The views and opinions expressed on this show, Crime Time, are not necessarily those of Axe Ministry or its affiliates. And thanks to producer Matt, producer Jay. Welcome to Crime Time. This is Crime Time podcast episode number 58. I'm Dr. Steve Albrecht, joining you from the Axe Media Group studios in Springfield, Missouri. So for this hour, I'll be talking with Donald DJ Vodicka. He's a former prison guard with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. He's the author of a book called The Green Wall, A Prison Guard's Struggle to Expose the Code of Silence in the largest prison system in the United States. We'll talk about his experiences and the corruption he saw amongst the guards working in some of the toughest and most dangerous prisons. So, Jay, are we ready to call him?
I don't know what happened to the darn thing.
So thanks for listening to Crime Time, where we talk about crime and crooks and cops and personal security. We'll talk about some dangerous people and lots of heroes, and we'll even mention a few stupid crooks. And most importantly, I'll talk about what you can do to keep yourself safe from crime and violence in your neighborhood, at home, at school, and even on the road. This show exists to make you feel more empowered and more secure and more educated on security issues and the criminal justice system. As background, I worked for the San Diego Police Department for 15 years as a patrol officer, reserve sergeant, and a domestic violence investigator, and now work as a training consultant and teach training workshops focusing on human resources, employee coaching, workplace violence, and security issues. Written 24 books on business, workplace violence, police subjects, and guns, all of which you can find on Amazon. My 3 gun books are available on Amazon Kindle. You can always reach me on my Crime Time website, crimetimeradio.com. Send me an email there.
Hello?
DJ Steve Albrecht live with us. How you doing today, brother?
Good, Steve. Good. Glad to be on your show.
Thanks for getting up early and being with me. We're talking about your book, The Green Wall, A Prison Guard's Struggle to Expose the Code of Silence in the Largest Prison System in the United States. So, DJ, really an interesting topic from my perspective because, I was always a cop and never a guy that was turning keys and working in corrections. So I have a lot of respect for the guys that do that work and the ladies that do that work because, you're in an environment which is dangerous as all get out and not the same equipment that you have out in the field, obviously. So tell me about your story of coming into the California Department of Corrections. I think you came out of the Army and then you went into the jails out of the Army. Yes, sir.
Steve, I started in the Army in 1983 to 1987 at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I was attached to a Special Forces unit, and I spent 4 years there, and then right before I got out, my father sent me an application that the California Department of Corrections was hiring, and that was the only thing open for anybody who wanted to get into law enforcement at the time because everything was hiring freeze. So I said, okay, Pops, I'll fill it out. And about 6 months before I came home, and as soon as I came back home, I started testing with the Department of Corrections, and I went to the academy in March of 1988. And for about 6 weeks, we had a small academy, about 300 potential correctional officers, and then I ended up. My first assignment was at Corcoran State Prison in the Central Valley in 1988, and I stayed there for about 4 years, and then I wanted to get out of there and open a new prison, and they were opening a new prison down in Calipatria State Prison down there, the El Central area. And in 1992, I went down there, and I got a chance to be handpicked for one of their elite units called the ISU, which is Investigative Services Unit, which is otherwise known as the Goon Squad. I was the evidence officer, so I collected all the evidence inside the institution, any crime scenes and anything that was criminal in nature.
So talk about what the ISU, what their mission is.
The ISU is basically they're the Internal Affairs / Investigations Unit. IGI, we have a unit. They were all same unit, like the gang investigators. We had evidence officers. We had tool control officers. We basically did. We had officers assigned to narcotics and drugs, and we were all handpicked, and we worked directly for the warden at that prison. And it was a great assignment. We had everybody respected us. Inmates respected us a lot. Some staff didn't really respect us because we're in that / internal affairs environment.
Right. So talk to me about the shift as you recall it. I don't remember when it happened, but I'm sure you know better. There was a time that there was called the California Department of Corrections, CDC, and then they added the R to the patch, the rehabilitation part. So I mean, that was a more than an accident that they wanted to make that shift that said we're actually trying to rehabilitate those guys. You came on in '88. When did that shift happen? Back over to the R part, the rehabilitation part.
It was in the mid to late '90s because at that time they started bringing in the PIA, the prison industry thing for the inmates to go and work auto body and do some type of trade, to get them to go back into society, and they had some type of trade, and they utilized that as the rehabilitation.
And do you get a sense that people don't realize in this country how much prison labor creates furniture and food and license plates and things like that? I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's cost effective. I mean, you got inmate labor in there, and it's like these guys are working basically for free or practically less than $1 or $2 a day, but the convicts and the inmates really enjoyed that because they gave them something to do instead of being on the yard and looking for trouble or just being bored and nothing to do. So back, that lasted for about probably a good 5 or 6 years, Steve. And then shortly after that, how it works, the budgets and money comes involved and they start cutting programs.
And really the idea that, these guys could get a high school diploma or a GED equivalent and even take college courses. I mean, is that stuff still happening in California, or has that been mostly eliminated, or?
No, it's still going on. They do have like a lot of the convicts and inmates don't know how to read and write, and some of them want to get their high school diplomas and actually college degrees, and that is still an ongoing thing. With the CDCR, that's still an ongoing thing, but it's the industry part that they cut out.
Right. So when you look at your story, when you started out, did you have a sense? I mean, I've seen your picture. You're a big guy. I mean, you're a huge dude. Did you feel like you're, in that environment, that you felt pretty protected by your colleagues, your fellow officers, and the support staff? But then, as we get into your story, things started to change when you got to another prison where you saw a lot of corruption and things really evolved in your career. When was that shift happen? About midway through your career?
Well, after I left Calipatri, I ended up going to Pelican Bay State Prison in 1994, and I met a good friend of mine, Joe Reynoso, who was my mentor at Cork when I first started out. He was the ISU sergeant up there at Pelican Bay, and he took me under his wing and made me as the evidence officer. I solved a lot of horrific crimes, a lot of crime scenes on a lot of heavy gang members, and then shortly after that, I left in 1996 because at the time my wife, who I'm not married to now, she couldn't handle it because it rained a lot up there in Pelican Bay, and it was a beautiful country. I enjoyed it. I loved it, but I had to leave when she wanted to leave, and I opened up Salinas Valley State Prison in 1996. One of the veteran officers, we had several veteran officers go down there to open the prison up, and then I stayed on their ISU unit for about 2 years and set it up, and I got burned out doing investigation stuff, so I went back to the line in November of 98, and then a couple weeks later, we had a Thanksgiving riot on that day, and I was told by the lieutenant of that yard, I need you to do the crime scene, Vodicka, because ISU was off on holiday weekends. They weren't there, and I had the experience and knowledge and the expertise, and that's what I did. And then shortly after that, like I said, the Southern Hispanic inmates attacked staff because the staff were disrespecting the Southern Hispanic inmates, who part of the EME, and it just got out of hand, and they had to stop.
Let's back up a bit. For people that don't know California, Pelican Bay is where they put the worst of the worst. Would you say that's accurate?
100% accurate. They had the indeterminate shoe terms up there, the heavy gang members, validated gang members. All the shot callers for all the gang members were housed at Pelican Bay in the shoe.
So if we look at, back in my time, it was the Black Guerrilla family and the Mexican Mafia and the Crips and the Bloods. And so tell our folks who are listening how California is really divided in between the Norteños and the Sureños in terms of the Mexican gangs. There's sort of a dividing line about what Fresno, Bakersfield, north and south of there.
Yeah, about around the Fresno area at the time I was in, from Fresno all the way to the Central Coast to like San Luis Obispo. Anything south of that was considered the Southern Hispanics at EME. Anything north of that to the California-Oregon border were the Norteños or Nuestra Familia, and that's how they divided their gangs.
So Nuestra Familia is our family, and so talk about the concept. I think no one knows this except a guy like you. Is how street taxes work and prison taxes work, and how the things that are being driven on the streets really come from, like you said, the shot callers inside. And I mean that's a whole world I just don't think people know about, and how powerful some of these cats can be in terms of their connection to the street and what goes on in the street in terms of drugs and violence and gang activity.
Yeah, Steve. In order to move drugs and whatsoever and gang hits on the streets and who's going to target it, it all has to come in from the inside. They have their own structure. And those familiar, the ME, they have their own structure. Like they have their own soldiers, their captains, their sergeants. It's almost military orientated, and everything has to come in from within the institution before they make either a hit on the street or some type of drug movement or whatever. Prostitution, money laundering, all that comes in from inside the institution. And
then these guys inside get payments and make payments through their commissary accounts and things like that.
Well, actually, it's when I was ISU, I found out what happens is the inmates would call, like if they're going to come in, like the Southern Mexicans and want some drugs, what they do is they call one of their sources on the street and they talk code over the payphones, which we record, and they talk, like what they want to bring in, like a half a football would be a half an ounce of heroin, half a gram of heroin. A full football would be a gram, and that kind of stuff. And what they do is the inmates who want this type of drug, they go to their accounts in the institution. They have money on their accounts, and they pull their money from their accounts and they mail it to a certain individual on the street who's going to bring the drugs in, and that individual gets whatever money from what's going to happen. And then that individual buys the drugs on the street, and then he or she brings it in to that inmate, and then through the visiting room, and then after the inmate goes back to his housing cell, he either removes it from his anal cavity or he regurgitates it up from his stomach, and then he breaks it down, and then he gives it to the people who actually bought the drug.
Right. So when you look at prison life in terms of the culture, I mean, is it safe to say that most of what happens in prison is divided by race? The whites have their gangs, the Aryan Brotherhood and the biker gangs, and then the Mexican gang members, and then the black gang members. I mean, in terms of survival in that really, testosterone-filled environment, these guys got to stay separate based on race. There's not a lot of mixing. Just can you have friends that are other races in prison?
You're absolutely right, Steve. Once you come to a yard or in a housing unit, they're all separated by their gang issues or race issues. The whites have their own tables. The Mexicans have or Southern Mexicans have their own table. The blacks, the Crips and Bloods, they all have their own certain areas where they sit or group together. And if you want to go up and talk to one of them, usually you go in pairs, and they do communicate with each other. But when it comes to politics, if they're going to fight with each other, then they whoever is aligned with each other, they usually have that backing from that other group or gang.
There was a guy that I knew, Marcus Young. He was a sergeant in the Ukiah Police Department up in Northern California, and he was stabbed and shot by a guy who was a Nazi lowrider. And this cat had, the devil horns tattooed on his forehead, and he was trying to get his girlfriend out of a shoplifting arrest that Marcus was walking this prisoner to his car when he was attacked by this guy. Ended up trying to get his police rifle, his police shotgun out of his car, and Marcus actually shot through the door and hit the guy and killed him. But he was severely injured as a result. He was shot and stabbed by this guy, Nazi lowrider. Talk about those guys. They're sort of an offshoot of Aryan Brotherhood.
Well, yeah, the NLR, the Nazi lowriders, is a fashion off the Aryan Brotherhood. There was a certain individual that was part of the AD, the Aryan Brother at the time, who branched off and wanted to start his own little group. The NLR, they're very violent, I could say, in the prison system. They're a firm believer of their own race and who they are. They don't like the Aryan Brotherhood. They don't like any gangs, and they're very they have very distinctive tattoos. They put the NLR black and white on their bodies, or 666 on their bodies, and the Nazi symbol on their bodies. But yeah, it was a small group who later became, in the Department of Corrections, they later became a validated gang group, which is now part of the validation process in the Department of Corrections, or a recognized gang in the Department of Corrections.
You were talking about being at Salinas Valley. I just saw, and maybe you saw this too, one gang member stabbed another one to death about 2 weeks ago in Salinas Valley, and they were in the same cells. I don't know if you saw that story.
No, I haven't seen that story at all, but I probably will do some research on it. And usually when something that happens, Steve, is that person who ended up stabbing that inmate and killing that inmate in the cell, he has to have approval from whatever gang tells him to make the hit. You know, they get the word to him and let him know that, hey, it's approved, you can take him out. If that individual would have taken that member out without approval, he'd be considered having a hit on him himself.
Right. So we're talking to DJ Vodicka. He's a former prison officer with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. He's the author of a book called The Green Wall, A Prison Guard's Struggle to Expose the Code of Silence in the Largest Prison System in the United States. So, DJ, we'll get to your story about how the Green Wall came as a name for your book and the experiences that you had with the corruption that you saw. But, I just wanted to talk to you about my experiences. I interviewed Robert Mack, who shot 2 people in 1992. He was working at General Dynamics in San Diego. He shot and killed his boss and shot and killed the HR guy. So that's how I got into workplace violence. I thought, I was working on a workplace violence book with a police psychologist. The book was called Ticking Bombs, and the psychologist was a guy named Michael Mantell. He was the PD psychologist in San Diego. And I interviewed Mac because those guys in workplace violence cases, as you know, usually kill themselves. They kill people and then they kill themselves at the scene. But this guy survived. So I went up to the California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo, which is actually quite a nice place. I mean, it's it's in beautiful territory out in wine country. And Men's Colony sounds like sort of a day spa for guys, right? You could go out there and hang out and watch football. So I went and interviewed Mac, and this was in '93. And in that time, they let me bring in a tape recorder, which was about the size of a brick, right, and all my notes and everything that I was working on. And I sat in some kind of day room with the PIO from the prison sitting there near me while I interviewed Mac for about 3 hours. Well, fast forward to, that was 93, and the book came out in 94. And it was the first workplace violence book, and his interview was really a centerpiece for the book because, we wanted to find out why the guy did what he did. So fast forward 20 years. I get to 2013, and I want to interview the guy again because I've been keeping in touch with him over the years, just sort of loosely by phone. And so by this time he's been moved to Chuckwalla in Blythe. And so I went out to meet him there. And I come in and, I had called the PIO and said, I want to interview this inmate for the research project I'm working on. They say, yeah, fine. And I said, can I bring in, some paper and with my notes on it? They said, yeah, you can have 6 sheets of paper. So I get to the visiting room, and the duty sergeant says, oh, you can't bring that inside. And I said, well, the PIO, the lieutenant told me I could. And he goes, well, he's not here, but you can't bring in this paper. So I had to go interview the guy based on just my memory because I couldn't bring anything inside the yard. So things sort of shifted from when I first went to Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo to the Chuckwalla. What's your sense of what gets brought into prisons by people that they have X-ray machines now, and it's pretty intense what the screening is to what you can bring inside, and yet still stuff gets smuggled in.
Yeah, Steve. I think the reason why they did that with you on your notes, and that sergeant should have followed the rules from the lieutenant. The PIO knows what media or anybody coming inside the institution, what he or she can bring in, and you should have been able to bring even a tape recorder in, or even your notes. You should have been, you prior law enforcement and what you do, but they're just definitely afraid of anything media or anything that goes, whatever happens behind the walls. They just don't want it to go back, and to be disclosed to the public. These metal detectors they have to go through. When I was in, they wand them with a wand. We didn't have actually metal detectors when I left in 2004. It was all about handheld wands, and they did have to go through a little metal detector, but not to see if something goes off. But yeah, they're very security minded when it comes to that.
So now I went to in February of this year. I went to Corcoran, your old prison, and I went to the SATF, the Substance Abuse Treatment Facility side. And I went up to Corcoran, and actually I got kind of screwed by the guards again. I had set up the prison visiting process, the form that you have to fill out, and I went through and I made an
Right.
appointment. And I got approved, and I went in there, and again, same story. I'm going to interview this inmate, Scott DeCry, who killed 8 people at his ex-wife's beauty salon in Seal Beach, California, back in 2011, October 2011. Went in and shot her to death and shot 7 other people to death. And so I get into the room, and I go through the screening process to, go through the metal detectors. They go, "Oh, you're not on the list, and you've not been approved." And I said, "Well, here's my appointment, and here's my sheet. I forget what it's called, but that sheet you fill out." And they said, "Well, not this time." Well, I mean, I flew from Missouri to San Diego to see my parents, and then rented a car and drove all the way to Corcoran, and they turned me away. So fast forward about that was in November of last year. So fast forward about 3 months into February of this year, I finally get squared away, and I get up to meet DeCry in prison at Corcoran again. And this time I got in, and I got to spend 3 hours with the guy sitting in the that big huge visiting room that they have there, and I got to hear his side of the story as to why he shot all these people. But the time I went through, the most recent time in February, they now have the metal detectors, which are actually the kind that you see at the airport that see anything that goes in your pocket. So if you have a piece of paper in your pocket, or you have a pencil, or you have anything that's it all shows up. So you have to go into the thing just like it'd be at the airport where you're totally screened. And yet, so my question to you is, how does stuff get into the prison? And we know the answer, right? How does drugs and cell phones and all the other contraband get into the prison? It's got to be from the guards. It's got to be from the vendors. How does that stuff get in?
2 ways that contraband can get inside the institution. Either it's a staff member, a free staff like a cook or a teacher or whatever, or even a correctional officer or a correctional supervisor. That's one way it can get in. The second way is it gets into their packages, which they get every 90 days, some type of, the heroin or methamphetamines or some type of drugs. I've never heard of a cell phone coming through a package, because they do get screened and x-rayed and all stuff like that. But as far as your cell phones or your drugs or whatever, yeah, staff bring it in, because what happens in the prison system, there's a lot of overtime in the Department of Corrections. But once that overtime dries up and there's no overtime, because, they're cutting position and stuff, a lot of officers rely on their overtime, because, that's what they rely on to live and survive. So right. They get caught up with a certain gang member or gang, and they feel pressure, and they can't have money to support their toys or whatever at home. And then the inmate calls them, and, "Hey, do me a favor, bring me in a cell phone, and I have my people on the street. Go get a cell phone for $100. I have my people give you $1,000 to bring you a cell phone in." Right. And these correctional staff get caught up in that, and they do illegal and criminal activity, and that's including drugs. And when I was at Salinas, right before I left, there was an officer there that actually brought a couple cell phones in to convicts, and he had bought a tape recorder into a convict who was a local rapper in L.A. that got arrested for second-degree murder, was doing life, and he wanted to make a recording inside of his cell. So this officer brought a tape recorder in. He made the recording. He gave it back to the officer, and the officer got it to his people on the street, and it was like the #1 hit song for a good couple of weeks. It was all over the radio in L.A., and they tracked it back down to the officer.
Wow. So one more thing before I get to the Salinas experience with you and how the Green Wall came as the title of your book and the corruption piece you saw. In working with DeCry and some of these other guys that I have interviewed, the currency in the prison for them, at least now, is stamps. So they're always saying, "Can you send me some stamps?" And so, I would send the guy $25 worth of stamps, and the stamps is what they use as currency. What's your experience with that?
I really didn't have a lot on what they did on that currency stuff. Mostly it was trust withdrawals from their books and whatever. Certain inmates had a lot of money on their books, some didn't, but they used that trust withdrawals in order to send it to the right people on the street for them to get paid for moving in contraband or drugs like that. And they must have started doing that when I left the Department of Corrections team.
So when you got to Salinas and you said there was the Thanksgiving riot, so the response by some of the correctional officers, as from your book's perspective, which the book's fascinating, the Green Wall, is that they actually formed a clique. I mean, a pseudo actual gang inside the prison with lapel pins and GW Green Wall as their name based on the color of the uniform for the corrections department. So talk about how that evolution you saw and that led to the corruption that you saw at Salinas.
After the Thanksgiving riot, no, the prison guards who were part of the Green Wall were just starting from the Green Wall. And these guys at the Green Wall were from the Investigative Services Unit, a unit that I used to work in. They were part of the Internal Affairs Unit who had the backing of the warden for this gang. Well, after that Thanksgiving riot, they were wearing turkey pin lapels on their jumpsuits to symbol the Thanksgiving riot on their unity. And then shortly after that, they were graffiti over in the housing units on the walls and little posters calling themselves the 723, the GW, the seventh letter of the alphabet is G, the 23rd is W.
Right.
And these actually guys that have a gang sign, they throw up a gang sign like like a W. Grab your thumb and pull in the. If you look at that, it looks like a W. And they were throwing those gang signs to each other when they were walking on the yard and showing each other as camaraderie between each other.
So did you see a parallel between what L.A. Sheriff's Department went through, where L.A. sheriffs were getting tattoos and guys were sort of claiming a sort of a gang culture amongst L.A. sheriffs? And, I'm sure you followed that story with Lee Baca going to prison and his undersheriff going to prison and all those things. I mean, did you see some parallels in what you saw with what was happening in L.A. sheriffs?
Absolutely, exactly, absolutely. I mean, what I've been reading and following the banditos and their skulls and their different little cliques of criminal activity by law enforcement. Yeah, it was almost parallel to what the Green Wall members were doing inside the Department of Corrections, and they're still currently active on this Green Wall inside the Department of Corrections as we speak.
So what you saw was inmate abuse and physical assaults and things like that, and much worse.
Yes, inmates would come up to me and talk to me and say, because I worked vehicle sally port after the Thanksgiving riot, because I was a marked man. I couldn't even work the line very much or work overtime, which I like to. I just came and did my 8 and hit the gate and went home, and I was getting labeled a rat, a snitch, and you're a dead man walking, you're an inmate lover, and yeah, absolutely, I saw inmates getting abused by these guys in the Green Wall. Actually, they were telling me these guys were planting weapons, trying to give them more time before they go home, and they did what they wanted to because, Steve, they had the backing from the warden. The warden threw me under the bus. And
so originally, I mean, if you go back to what you were talking about in your book, the warden originally asked you to investigate these guys, and then later, recanted his support of you.
Well, what happened was, that's pretty accurate. But what happened was, Lieutenant Lewis, who was a good friend of mine at Pelican Bay, he was part of the Internal Affairs lieutenant, and he saw these little guys in his unit doing all this illegal activity. He was totally against it, and he tried to go up to the warden and say, "Look, I want these guys off the ISU. I want them off my squad." And the warden says, "No, that squad belongs to me, and you leave them where they're at." Well, so then Lewis told the warden, said, "Hey, Officer Vodicka knows a lot about these guys. You really need to talk to him." So I got relieved from my post one day, and the warden, and when I went to the warden, and he basically asked me, "Hey, do you know anything about these guys who call themselves the Green Wall in my prison?" And yeah, so I have a lot of knowledge. I have firsthand information, and the convicts talked to me about it and actually seen abuse by these guys. And he said, "Well, I need a report from you, Officer Vodicka." And I said, "Sir, I work with these guys. I have to be with these guys every day." He goes, "Vodicka, I want a report on my desk Monday." So I typed up a report, Steve, stamped it confidential, and called my partner, Joe Reynoso, who was at Pelican Bay as a lieutenant, squad lieutenant, and told him what was going on. He said, "Just keep a copy of it for yourself. DJ, turn it in." Well, I turned it in on Monday, and then 2 months later, I get approached by these guys from the Green Wall who worked ISU, and they quoted verbatim what was out of my memorandum. The only person who had my memorandum was the warden.
Wow. So you ultimately ended up testifying in front of a California State Senate commission or something, kind of a whistleblower watchdog kind of a commission as a result of this?
Yes, sir. I did. After what happened to me at Salinas, how it goes up to that end, detail up to that end is, I was interviewed by the OIG, Office Inspector General, who came down and did a big investigation on the Green Wall. They wanted to know me. They interviewed me for about 4 hours, and a couple weeks later, they came down and swooped on the prison and removed the warden from the office, ISU, took all evidence and all that, and that was basically the work there. And then I got transferred overnight to another prison, which is Pleasant Valley State Prison in the Central Valley, just to get out of Salinas, and it only lasted for a few months because, the word travels about, officer is a rat, Vodicka's a rat, and everything else. So I got out, and then shortly after that, I had to retain a lawyer because my own union, Steve, chapter president came up to me and said, "Oh, you're Officer Vodicka. We've been advised not to talk," and he walked away from me.
Wow.
So I had to go out and find my own legal attorney to fight the Department of Corrections. And shortly after that, I got subpoenaed to the government oversight was doing a hearing up in Sacramento in January 2004, and I had to get escorted up there by California Highway Patrol, and I had a vest on, and my warden was behind me, Joe Reynoso was behind me, heavily armed. The state capitol, which was a lot of media at the time, and walked into the Burton room, which is a huge area, and it was packed full, no seats available. There were people lined against the walls. The senators were up there and called me down there, and I got down there. When I raised my right hand to talk about what happened, Jackie Spear, the senator, who's now a congresswoman in D.C., lifted up the L.A. page, the front page. I was on the front page of the L.A. Times, and that's when it all started. I divulged everything, what was going on in the Green Wall to these guys, these senators, and they didn't know anything about it.
So did you think there was some justice when the IG's office came in and removed the warden and moved a lot of these guys out? I mean, was that the start of a little bit of justice, or did they not go far enough, from your opinion?
I thought they were going to go a lot farther than what they did. I mean, they had a lot of evidence and physical evidence. And I don't know if I think you might have read the book, but if you read the book, the OIG reports the full OIG report is in the book.
Right.
And that OIG clearly speaks that there was a green wall, that the warden did know about it. He was very adamant about talking about it and trying to saying, I don't recall. And they did, think he was lying and all that. But I thought I was going to go farther than that because I thought, there was, officers later on were getting walked off and terminated for this and all that. But like I said, our union is so powerful. The CCPOA is so powerful in the state of California. And later on, these officers got their jobs back because the union, like I said, is so powerful. They're just as corrupt as some of the stars are.
I think some people, maybe even inside California, don't know this, but besides the teachers union, I think the prison guards union is one of the most powerful unions in California, yes?
In California and probably in the nation.
Right, just because the size of the group and the political power that they wield. And, in corrections, I mean, as tough a job as it is, you can make really good money in California Department of Corrections, right? I mean, those guys get paid over $100,000 a year, and then plus the overtime and things like that. It's a good gig. Why did you think, as you reflect on it, why did you think the warden, was he afraid of the Green Wall guys? Was he afraid of the scandal? Did he support what they were doing? Why would you think the guy would put his career at risk like that by backing a group like that inside his own prison?
Because these guys, part of the Green Wall Street, some of them worked at Soledad, where the warden actually came from CTF back in the old days, and he knew these guys, and they were part of the Green Wall. They were part of him, and they worked with him at CTF, and he trusted these guys. And the warden saw the prison at Salinas being basically run by convicts and inmates. They were doing whatever they wanted to do. So he said, hey, look, you guys, we need to get my prison back in order. I want my prison back in order. I want you guys to go put fear and intimidation to these inmates and do whatever you got to do. You have my backing. So the warden was actually the kingpin. He was actually the man that controlled the Green Wall at the prison. He didn't want anybody to know about it, even in Sacramento in the Department of Corrections. His bosses, he kept it from his bosses in Sacramento. And that's when all hell broke loose.
And how many guys, if you looked at the Green Wall, at least in Salinas, how many guys were involved in that activity?
I'd say at first there was a few of them. Probably it grew to, we had like close to 700 guards there. Probably a good 200 of them were associated with the Green Wall members.
Wow.
Anywhere from 50 to 200 that actually associated with the guys and hung out with them. If you weren't a part of them, they had nothing to do with you. If you were like ratted on them or you talked negative about them, they'd actually go in the parking lot and roll your car that you were driving. They would cut your tires. They would scratch GW on your paint. Wow. These guys were crucial, man. They were not people to mess around with, but I wasn't afraid of them.
We're talking to DJ Vodicka. His book is The Green Wall, A Prison Guard's Struggle to Expose the Code of Silence in the Largest Prison System in the United States. And so, DJ, your sense, I don't know, what is there, 29 prisons in California? Something like close to that? Something like that?
Well, when I started, Steve, in 1988, there was 16 prisons. When I got out in 2006, there was a total of 36 prisons in California.
So if you look at 36 prisons and your experience and being in that environment, there's no there's no sense of saying, well, this is the only place that this green wall business is happening. There's offshoots or splinters of it in other prisons, right? And when you look at that reason, I mean, wouldn't these guys, the correctional officers, wouldn't they rationalize it, say, hey, it's survival of the fittest, and we have to do what we have to do?
Yeah, because yes, Steve, because my attorney Lanny Tron, who's out of California, Camera, who took my case on, and we're still friends to this day, and he took on another case at High Desert State Prison when the green wall was active again up there a few years back. And what happened was an officer saw a lot of wrongdoing, and he tried to report it just up the chain of command like I did, and he got ostracized, and he got sergeants were pepper spraying him for no reason, and he was just like, he was done. And he came home one night and he told his wife the next day, I don't want to go to work. I don't want to go to work. And he said, well, honey, you got to go to work. We have to survive. We have to live, So he tried to go back. He told his wife, hey, I'm going to go back to work. And he never went back to work. He went up into the high country in the mountains, and he committed suicide.
Wow.
Because he couldn't handle it anymore.
Wow.
He couldn't handle it anymore. My attorney took on that case, and they finally settled with that case probably last year sometime. But the OIG even found that High Desert State Prison had a form of the green wall and how they were treating convicts. And just last year, Steve, last year, actually a few months ago, I was contacted by a law firm out of San Francisco, and the green wall is actively, and this is a place where you used to live, Steve. They're actively doing the green wall at RJD, Donovan's state prison,
San Diego,
and they're actually calling themselves the green wall, and it's coming back up again because a law firm out of the Bay Area took on a case for inmates a few years back, and now it got settled. And just recently, I read the 72-page legal document she sent to me that the federal judge ordered the Department of Corrections for all officers by November 8th to wear body cameras.
Wow.
They have to wear body cameras because these guys in the green wall, Steve, were abusing ADA inmates. They were actually pulling them out of their wheelchairs, throwing them on the ground, breaking their arms, having them walk to child without walkers. They were abusing the ADA inmates.
Wow.
That is so crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest challenge that you probably faced as a guy, coming out of a structured system like the Army and going into prison is, you have to have eyes in the back of your head, and you say, I'm an unarmed guy in a facility full of killers and people that use violence on a regular basis, and then you got the whole gang, culture in there. And so I think, one of the situations that street cops always face, and this is, everything turns into an us versus them modality. There's us, which is the good guys, and then everybody else is an a-hole or everybody else is bad. And I'm guessing in prison, that's even doubled down because the culture really feels like us versus them, because literally that's what happens with you all the time. If you're, if you're a cop, I mean, your chances of being killed in the field vary on what's going on. But if you're in a prison system, I mean, your chances of being killed are, it's like being a football player. You're going to get injured. I mean, it's just going to happen. So do you think these guys around the state prison system, and, if we even go outside California, they rationalize their behavior as, hey, it's all about us versus them?
That's correct. That's how the code is inside the prison. It's us in green against them in blue, or now it's us in green against them in orange. And they got nothing to lose. And in the Department of Corrections, when I was in, they had a no hostage policy. That means if an inmate takes an officer as a hostage, has a knife up to the neck, and he's trying to get out that gate, the CERT team, which is like the SWAT team on the streets, they have a green light to take out the officer to get to the inmate, and that's how the policy is with the Department of Corrections. And yeah, it's us versus against them.
We got about 6 or so minutes left, and I want to get your sense. I mean, I know you touched on this in your book a little bit about just the prisonization of the United States, and I mean, it's a big conversation now, especially around race issues, and we put a lot of people in prison and in jails in the United States. A lot of stuff, is being debated all the time about drug crimes and whatnot. And you look at Oregon, just basically decriminalized all the drugs, and then in California, we had the proposition, which I forget what it is, 42 or whatever, that my former chief, Lansdowne, and the guy that's now the current DA of L.A., Gascom, created this basically decriminalization of drug crimes, and petty theft is now up to $1,000, or you can basically steal a lot of stuff and not go to jail. So, what's your sense of what's going wrong in the prison system in the United States, and do you have a sense of what may be going right? What are we doing right in the prison system? So, what's going right and wrong in prison?
Well, I think what I think the wrong thing is this is my opinion, Steve. I'm not really for the three strikes law unless somebody commits murder or some hideous crime. But a lot of guys were in prison for either still in a candy bar or something like that, and they were getting their third strike because the third strike was implemented in the 90s, and they really have to revise that three strikes law, and that's how a lot of these guys can actually come out of the institution. But lately with this COVID thing going on, I mean, a lot of the Department of Corrections are feeling a lot of pressure by lawyers and the prison activists on the streets, and they're getting scared, and I think they need to dump out, who these people are less violent, non-violent, and for them to leave the institutions.
There's before I ask you what we're doing right in prison, I know that California at least has a standard based on age. The guy interviewed, Robert Mack, that killed the two people in General Dynamics. He's probably almost 70 years old, and he's been in over 25 years, and so now they have a standard, which is if even for murder, if you've been in over 25 years, and even if you got a life sentence, we're going to let you out because prison, as you know, prison health care is super expensive, and we're taking care of these older inmates that have really serious health issues, and it's big bucks. So there's a movement there to say, well, okay, no matter what the guy did, if he's old enough, to make parole or to be let out based on his age, that's what we're going to do.
I think it. They have to look at every individual, their case by case, and how that is. But I think you're right because it's very expensive for the taxpayers in California. To house one inmate in California, Steve, right now is about $85,000 a year, and if you got 100,000 inmates in there, that's a lot of money.
Right.
So yeah, they look at it that way. It's all about money and how they can cut ways and cut back.
I mean, if you look at, you had just a horrific experience at the end of your career there in terms of having to go against guys that you thought you could trust. And this whole green wall, sort of subculture, which is infiltrated and permeated. I mean, do you see some positives in the prison system in the United States? I mean, are things that we're trying to do to get people to get out and be able to function and return to work? And you talked about, I think, a really key piece is how much illiteracy there is in the prison system. And a lot of these guys, can't read or write to the degree that they can go out and get a job. And I mean, are we doing anything that gives us hope in the prison system?
I hope so, because, I do follow a lot of that stuff in the prison system, and these guys getting college degrees and master's degrees and PhDs, and then I hope they can one day, if they have a release date, to come out and to pursue their dream. I mean, it's all about humanity, and I hope that's the right direction. The Department of Corrections in California or any prison system in the United States are heading that way.
When you look at the things that you saw in your prison career, I guess a lot of people's sense of prison is what they see on TV and the movies, the Green Mile and Shawshank Redemption and stuff like that. I remember a movie I saw which really impacted me as a kid. It was called The Jericho Mile. I think they shot it at Folsom, and it had this actor whose name escapes me. He was a runner, and Brian Denny, he was in it. It was a really good film, The Jericho Mile. It was done by Michael Mann, and he did the movie Heat, and he was also the creator of Miami Vice. And it was about this guy who was a world-class Olympic runner, and he would run on the yard every day, and they followed his whole story. And it was really, really a cool film. But when you think about people's perception of prison life and what it's about, it's really driven by the movies. I mean, you know the reality. And talk to me about the sexual assault issue, which is something that every man thinks about in prison and jail. Is what's going to happen to him? I mean, that's a reality, right?
It's a reality. They each gang set they look at the weak and the prey, and they go after them. Because a lot of these guys, inmates, men are in the men prison and women are in the women prison, and that's all they see every day. And yeah, sexual assaults inside the prison happen every day. And that movie that you watched, The Jericho Mile, I watched that. That was a great movie, Steve. I mean, I watched it. The guy was running out there in the wet mud, the rain, the cold. Nothing stopped him. And that was an excellent movie. And there's other movies that are out there. I don't know if you've seen them, but there's a movie based on a real true story when I was at Corcoran. It's called the Gladiator Fights. Back then, when I was in the 90s, how the guards were betting on the inmates to come off the yard dead or alive. And there was a movie called Felon. It came out about 9 years on the DVD with Val Kilmer.
Wow.
I don't know if you've seen that movie. But that is an excellent movie. It's about 99.9% true. And then just recently, that same director and screenwriter, Rick Roman Wall, came out with a movie called The Shot Caller. And that's a pretty good movie about the CDCR, how the gangs operate in the prison system.
Right. So if you look at your life, I mean, you got, you know, a settlement from the state system in terms of, you know, being able to retire and leave the profession. I mean, what are you doing? I know you have some concerns about your personal security and safety. I don't want you to give up anything, but what are you doing in your work? Are you consulting in security issues, or are you just enjoying your life? What are you doing?
Well, you know, I mean, they retired me on medical retirement, and 2 weeks before trial, they settled with me, and they didn't want to take my stuff into a court arena because everything would become public information, the depositions, everything, and you know, I'm enjoying retirement. I lost both parents. You know, my dad, before he passed away, you know, his last dying words to me, because I got to see my father pass. His last words to me were like, "Son, me and your mom are proud of you. What you did, we were really proud of you. You need to write a book, son. Write a book and talk about what happened to you. Share your book for the world. Let everybody know."
Yeah.
You know, but right now I'm enjoying life. I'm doing a lot of podcasts. I mean, this story, this book is very, very rare. No book out there with everything going on in the United States with criminal justice reform, prison reform. Everybody's reaching out to me and want to hear firsthand from the correctional officer who exposed the code of silence in the Department of Corrections.
Yeah, that's great that you got to be with your father and you know, to get your dad's blessing about the work that you did. And it took so much courage for, you know, you to do this, just like it is for any other cop that wants to see, you know, the right things that happen in this world in terms of corruption, what's going on. And, you know, I really applaud you for what you're doing. So we've been talking with DJ Vodicka. His book is The Green Wall, a prison guard's struggle to expose the code of silence in the largest prison system in the United States. DJ, thanks very much for your time and your efforts on what you've been doing in your career, and I really appreciate you talking with our group today.
Hey, Steve, anytime, buddy. And anytime you want to reach out to me or talk about any other topics about the prison system, I'm actually considered one of the experts about the code of silence, what happens inside the prison system.
Thanks a lot for that, and I appreciate it. We'll be in touch, DJ. Take care, brother.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. So in our world, there are sheep and shepherds and wolves, and too many people are sheep and too few people are shepherds. There are a lot of wolves out there. There are not enough police officers or sheriff's deputies to protect us all, so you need to be a shepherd. Take care of yourself and protect your family and your loved ones and your friends and your coworkers, and pay attention and be prepared to defend yourself with legal force if necessary. Be a good witness for the police if you see a crime, and stay safe and aware and alert at home, at work, at school, and even on the road. So thanks for listening to Crime Time. My thanks to Jim Whining and producer Jay and producer Matt and all the good folks at Axe Media Group. I'm Steve Albrecht, and thanks for listening to What I Know is Right.